Scripture today. So let's just talk to God real quick. God, thank you. God, thank you that you love us. Thank you that you have given us your word. I pray that we would love you and love your word more because of today. Thank you for Christ, who is our King. Please come back quickly, Jesus. I pray that you would give us eyes and ears to understand your Scriptures today. Give us clear minds and give us wisdom, please. Holy Spirit, please illuminate our thinking so that we would be enlightened to the meaning of your text. Please guard me from saying anything that's wrong. God, let me be distracting. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, we have a small crowd today, but that's okay. It's probably because of the weather. I am still really excited about today. We're going to start out today with some review, and I don't know how long this is going to take. It might take us a long time, and we'll adjust accordingly, but this review is really, really important. But we're going to start out with some philosophy of how we're doing this and why we're doing this for a second. That we kind of covered the first week, but there's some people who came in halfway through, and it's always good to talk about this kind of stuff again. So I want you to imagine that somebody came to you and they said, I want you to tell me the story of X. And I've got 3 movies, and I'm sure everyone's seen at least one of these 3 movies. These are 3 classic movies. It's a Wonderful Life, Finding Nemo, and Star Wars. So if somebody came to you and they said, okay, I want you to tell me the story of, Finding Nemo in 5 minutes, how would you tell that story? What parts of it would you emphasize? What parts of it would you not emphasize? It would really get hard with Star Wars. So let's say you had to tell the story of Star Wars in 10 minutes. Okay, what would you talk about? Would you leave some characters out? Would you leave everyone in? How would you do it? And these are the kind of things that I had to think through when I was approaching this Sunday school. Pastor Tim came to me and he said, you have 7 weeks to get through the whole Bible. And so I had to think, what am I going to do? How am I going to approach this? To ask the question another way, let's say someone came to you and they said, I want you to write a history of the United States over the past 10 years in 3 pages. How would you write that? You would probably mention this guy because he's really significant. You'd probably mention the decline of the economy. You might mention the rise of social media recently and its impact on our history. You might mention volley. This is my dog. This was my dog. It died. There was some conflict or some controversy about its breed and stuff like that. It's a really interesting story. It had cataracts over its eyes before it died. Is that what you call it, cataracts? Over its eyes before it died? This is part of American history, right? It happened, right, in America. But how important is it in a 10-year history of America? In a 3-page paper, you're not going to write about that. But there's one thing we would all write about. This event. I might spend a page or a page and a half on this event. Because this event shapes all of the other events. No, that's not in the past 10 years, is it? Let's make it 15 years. This event is so significant that it affects all of the other events. So when we're telling a story, especially when we come to a story like the Bible, we have to ask the question, what events are like this event? And what events are like my dog? It happened, and it actually is important, at least in my story. But what events do we leave in? What events do we leave out? And the Bible is a story. It is the greatest story ever told. And that's what we're talking about. It's shaped just like any other story. It has the beginning. It has the inciting moment that changes everything that we thought we knew was true. Building up to the climax. Everything points to the climax. And then the action brings down to the ending. That's what we talked about the first week a little bit. So the thing that we are emphasizing, these big moments that we're emphasizing, are relationships. Does anyone remember? To figure out where the story comes to next. We ended last week by saying the people arrived in the land. They conquered the land. Joshua says, choose this day who you're going to serve. He says, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. All the people say, we will serve Yahweh. And what does Joshua say to them? You can't. Because God is a holy God. You can't serve God until he enables you to. No restored relationships are going to happen until God enables those restored relationships to take place. So, we're asking the question, how should I read my Bible? And we're answering that question by asking the question, what is the Bible about? If someone walked into an elevator with you and they said, what's the Bible about? And you had 30 seconds to tell them before they got off the next floor, how would you answer the question? That's the question we're trying to answer. We're going to fly through this stuff, and we're probably not going to cover everything that I have. And if we have to abandon the PowerPoint, it's totally fine. The people get to the land. The land promised to whom? Abraham. Okay, so this is all one story here. It's all one continuous story. The people get there, and in Joshua, they divide the land up into tribes. Everyone gets every tribe, depending on which son of Jacob you're from, gets a part of a piece of land, except for Levi. Levi gets no land. He gets little sections and little places, but he gets no land at all because it says their inheritance was Yahweh their God. God was their inheritance. This is a timeline. The Exodus and the Conquest. Joshua. We're moving into the time of the Judges. So let's move this. Is that still humorous the second time I do it? Probably not, but I think it's still cool. Okay, we're in the time of the Judges. We're going to fly over this because Pastor Tim is covering this in Sunday school, and he's doing an excellent job. There's a cycle of the people sin, they go into slavery, they pray to God, God provides a judge, then they go into sin, then they go into slavery, and then they pray to God, and then God provides a judge, and God rescues them. But ultimately, the problem in Judges is this. Judges 17:6. Let's go there. And if you have a physical Bible, turn to this because I want you to look at this. Judges 17:6 says, "In these days there was no king in Israel." Judges 18:1. So Judges 17:6, "In these days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did whatever they wanted." Judges 18:1, "In these days there was no king in Israel." Okay, and then how does the book of Judges end? The people are disobedient, and the book of Judges ends, and in these days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did whatever they wanted. What's implied here? It's there's no king in Israel, so everyone does whatever they want. What do we need? A king. Specifically, we need a king who will possess the gates of his enemies. A king from the line of Judah. A king who will bring the obedience of the people. We need a king who can stop these people from rebelling. A king who can say, this is Yahweh's law. Walk in it. Follow it. Live. Next, we turn the page and we get to the book of Ruth, which is about how to date. I'm just kidding. It's not about how to date. A lot of people think that. But what is so significant about Ruth? Ruth is from where? Do we know? Does anyone have this random? Moab. Where did Moab come from? Oh, Josh talked about this last week. Never mind. We know this. Moab comes from Lot, who had an incestuous relationship with his daughter when she got him drunk. So Ruth does not have a very good background. She's a Gentile. She's not an Israelite. Okay? We get to the end of Ruth, and this is what's significant about the book of Ruth. Ruth chapter 4, verse 17. They have Ruth and Boaz have a son. Naomi cares for the son. Verse 17, it says, the daughter of the woman said, a son has been born to Naomi, and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. This is the first genealogy we've seen in a very long time in these narratives, and what it does is it traces a guy named Perez. Who is Perez the son of? Judah. Perez is the son of Judah. It says Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram, who fathered Amminadab. Amminadab fathered Nahshon, blah, 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 blah. And it says, and Obed fathered Jesse, who fathered David. Who is David? We haven't gotten to this guy yet. But we need a king. We know that from Judges. And then we get to Ruth. And it sets us up from this guy who's a son of a Gentile who will lead us up to a guy named David who's a descendant from Judah. This is getting exciting. We get to Samuel. I want to talk about Samuel 1 real quick because I think this story is just absolutely hilarious. There's this guy who has 2 wives, not smart. Elkiah, thank you. He has 2 wives. One of them is Hannah. Hannah can't have kids, just like every other story, like in the Bible. So Hannah's just like crying one day because she can't have kids. The other wife is like making fun of her because she can't have kids, and then she's just crying. So her husband walks up to her, and he's just like, what he says is, "Hannah, why are you crying? Aren't I better than 10 children?" I really think this guy had great intentions. Like, he wanted to comfort her. Not a good job. Hannah goes to the temple to pray because she's like, this is not working out to like weep here. She goes to the temple, and the priest walks up, and she's like praying, like talking with her mouth, but no words are coming out. And the priest is like, "Why are you drunk and coming to the temple?" She is not having a good day. And the priest ends up saying, "You're going to have a son. His name's going to be Samuel," the name of the book. So Samuel is born. He becomes a prophet for the people in Israel. And we get later on in the text, the current priest, bad. His sons, bad. We get to chapter 8 of 1 Samuel. And the people say to Samuel, verse 4, "So the elders of all Israel gathered together and went to Samuel at Ramah, and they said to him, 'Look, you are old, and your sons do not follow your example. Your sons are bad and they're wicked, and they don't follow the law of Yahweh. Therefore, appoint for us a king to judge us, as the other nations have.'" Is this good or bad? We want a king. Is this bad or good? It's bad? Is it? You think it's good. Why do you think it's good? Because they need a king. Why do you think it's bad? God definitely seems to say they're rejecting me. We also need a king. They say we want to be like the other nations. That's probably bad. The idea of a king has actually been prophesied, though. So maybe what these people are saying is, in a sense, we want the seed of the woman to come and crush that of the serpent. We need the king who will possess the gates of his enemies. Maybe. But who do they choose? They choose a guy named Saul from the tribe of Benjamin. Why should that, red flare, tribe of Benjamin? He's not from Judah. We need a king from the tribe of Judah. Saul comes to power. He's not a very good king. I'm going to have to abandon this PowerPoint at some point. Saul, not a good king, going downhill. We get to 1 Samuel 16. God says, "You know what? Saul's not good. I want a king after my own heart, a king who loves like I do, a king who thinks like I do." And so he anoints a guy named David, who's a shepherd. He's the youngest of all of his brothers. David is anointed king, but he's not king yet because Saul is still king. We get to 1 Samuel 16, very famous story, David versus Goliath. Goliath's like this giant, right? And he's just cursing Yahweh all day long. And David says, "Why are you guys standing around while this guy curses Yahweh our God? Why are we doing this?" And so David comes out with a sling, and he just flings this thing around, throws a rock, it hits Goliath right between the eyes, he falls over dead, and David chops off Goliath's head and holds it up. This is a pretty crazy picture. I actually edited out the most gory part of this picture. But I feel like this picture really well represents what happened. David is a warrior. He possesses the gates of his enemies. And this story is a lot bigger than just David. This is a story of an anointed king from the tribe of Judah who represents his people in a battle against the ultimate enemy, a giant, kills him in an unusual way, cuts off his head, so the enemies flee and the people of God triumph. And it looks like maybe in David, maybe, we are going to see this restoration happen. We move from the time of David to the time of Saul. David's a really good guy. We get to 2 Samuel chapter 7. And God makes a covenant with David. This is probably the most important chapter of the entire Old Testament. 2 Samuel chapter 7. David says, God, I want to build you a house. Where has God been living all this time? What did they build for him in the wilderness that we talked about last week? Tabernacle. So God's living in this tabernacle. David says, God, I want to build you a house for your name. And God says to David in verse 4, are you to build me a house to live in? God says, you're not going to build me a house. I'm going to build you a house. And it's not a literal house. It's a figurative house. It's a dynasty. Verse 9, he says, halfway through the verse, I will make a name for you. Who else has he said this to? I'll make a name for you. Abraham. He says the same thing he says to Abraham, to David. Verse 11, the Lord himself will make a house for you. When your time comes and you will rest with your fathers, I will rise up for you a descendant who will come from your body. I will establish his kingdom. He will build a house for me in my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be a father to him, and he will be a son to me. There will be a son from David who is going to rule and possess the gates of his enemies and conquer. He will be a son from the tribe of Judah. And then it says, when he does wrong, I will discipline him with a rod. With blows from others. Is this good or bad? When he does wrong, I would discipline him. Who is this contrasting? Sorry, let's go to the next verse. My faithful love will never leave him, as I removed it from Saul. He says, look, Saul, when he disobeyed, I got rid of him. But with your son, here's what's going to happen. If he does wrong, if he does, and he probably will, if he ever does wrong, I will discipline him, but I will never let my faithful love depart from him. David has a heart like God's. In chapter 9, David says, okay, is there anyone else from Saul's house? Is there anyone from Saul's house at all? I want to find someone who is my enemy. And you're like, what's David going to do? And so someone comes to me and says, Mephibosheth is still alive. And Mephibosheth is this guy. He's the last person in Saul's house. When he was young, there was this attack from this foreign nation. This lady picks him up, running with him, trips and falls. He becomes a cripple for the rest of his life. He has nothing to offer David at all. David can profit nothing from him, and he says, bring him to me. He brings him, the servant brings Mephibosheth to David. David says, you can come into my house, and you can eat at my table. David has a heart like God's heart. David rescues people who can give him nothing and brings them in to eat with them. This is the kind of person we need. Chapter 10, David conquers. David is a king who conquers his enemies, possesses their gates. He is a king who has the ruler's staff. And then we get to chapter 11. You guys remember this moment? I remember when I saw this for the first time, and I was so angry. I'm not going to give away what happens here in case someone hasn't seen this. Has everyone here seen Star Wars? We know what happens in this scene? Okay. Darth Vader is Luke's father, and I had never heard that before when I watched this. And I'm like, what? That guy just chopped off his hand. He says, now I'm your dad. Wait, I was so angry. This is one of the biggest twists in movie history right here. Like, everyone knows this scene. People who haven't even seen this movie know this scene. Okay, I showed this movie to my cousins. They were talking about the next day. Darth Vader is Luke's dad? What? How can that happen? We get to 2 Samuel 11, and we have a twist just like that. David, who conquers, who loves like God does, who loves God, he has a heart like God's heart, walks out on his house, sees a woman taking a bath, and says, I want to sleep with her. It is one of the biggest twists in the entire Bible. He sleeps with this woman named Bathsheba. Her husband, Uriah, is one of David's best friend, one of his small people in his Navy SEAL group of his team. And he says, you know what? She gets pregnant. And he's like, I've got to cover this up. He says, Uriah, come home, sleep with your wife, enjoy her while you're home from battle. He says, no, I'm not going to do that because David is more, Uriah has higher standards than David. Uriah won't sleep with his wife, and so David's just like, okay, well, I got to kill him. So David gives him battle orders that sends him into battle. Uriah dies in battle. David is an adulterer and a murderer. He marries Bathsheba. They have a kid. He looks like the good guy who rescued the widow. But God knew about it. And he sends Nathan the prophet to him. And Nathan says that God knows what you did. And then David in verse 13, David responds to Nathan, I've sinned against the Lord. And Nathan responded to David, the Lord has taken away your sin from you. Is this right? Like, can God do that? Can God just say, David, you go free? In Exodus 34, God declared his name. He said, my name is Yahweh. Yahweh, I'm merciful and gracious, and I always forgive sins, but I never let the guilty go unpunished. How can God say to David, you go free? This is a huge twist in the biblical narrative. We move then from David to his son Solomon. Solomon, good king or a bad king? It's a good question. The thing Solomon is most famous for is building a temple for God, just like God promised. And if we look at 1 Kings, 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 20. This is under Solomon's rule. 1 Kings 4:20, it says, Judah and Israel are as numerous as the sands of the sea. What's that referring to? They're as numerous as the sands of the sea. What? Okay, Abraham. This is what God promised Abraham. Okay, let's look at verse 21. It says, Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. This is the land God promised to Abraham. Solomon is ruling over it. And then let's look at verse 32. And Solomon composed 300 proverbs and numbered 1,005 songs. He described trees from the cedars of Lebanon, blah, 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 blah. Verse 34. The people came from everywhere, sent by every king on earth who had heard of his wisdom and listened to Solomon. Solomon is being a blessing to the nations. In fact, we find in chapter 10, the queen of Sheba, one of the most powerful queens in the earth, says, there's no way this guy is really this wise. She comes to him, and Solomon just wows her with his wisdom. And she says, this is a pagan queen, says in verse 9, may Yahweh your God be praised. The nations are learning about Yahweh because of the wisdom of a king from the tribe of Judah reigning on the throne. This king who builds a temple for God to live in. God moves from the tabernacle to the temple. There's a thick cloud once again. The people can't even enter because God's glory is just so fierce. And then, actually verse 23 first of chapter 10. Of 1 Kings. Then Solomon surpassed all the kings in the world in riches and wisdom. The whole world wanted an audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. Everyone wants to know Solomon. And then chapter 11. Solomon loved many foreign women. Verse 3, he had 700 wives and 300 concubines. This is not the seed of the woman that we need. Solomon is disobedient to God. David has a son named Solomon. Solomon has a son named Rehoboam. Rehoboam should be the rightful heir of the throne. We're getting to 2 Kings now. But then he has another son named Jeroboam. And I made this red and blue and purple because red and blue makes purple. And we find that this united kingdom that we've worked so hard to get is divided. But God says in 1 Kings 11, it says to Solomon, because you've disobeyed me, this kingdom will be torn in two. But in 1 Kings 11 through 13, the Lord said to Solomon, since you have done this and not kept my covenant, my statutes, what I commanded you, I will tear the kingdom away from you and give it to your servant. However, I will not do it during your lifetime because of your father David. Because of David, because of his covenant with David, that's important. I will tear it out of your son's hands. Yet I will not tear the entire kingdom from you. I will give you one tribe. You will have one tribe. Verse 36. I will give you one tribe. Verse 32. But one tribe will remain. One tribe will stay with the king. What tribe is that? Judah. Because a king will come from Judah who will conquer his enemies. The scepter, the ruler's staff, will not depart from between Judah's feet until he whose right it is comes. The king who possesses the gates of the enemy and brings the obedience to the people. Is this going to happen with the covenant with David? Maybe. We find this divided kingdom. There's a lot of kings. Which one is the south good? Is the north good? Like, who has good kings?
Wasn't it also Judah and also part of the tribe of Benjamin as well?
I don't know. Maybe. Benjamin doesn't have a very big tribe. I know that. I don't know. Pastor, do you know it? Is it Judah and Benjamin? Here's the important thing. I don't really answer your question, but the important thing is this. They have Jerusalem. Jerusalem is where this king will rule from. This king who will come will rule from Jerusalem. That's the important thing. Judah possesses Jerusalem. We get to hear Jerusalem is a place of worship, right? So the northern king is like, okay, this is bad because the people are going to go down into Judah and they're going to want to join them again. So he sets up a golden calf in Dan in the north. And in the south, I forget the name of the city is. He says, "These are the God who brought you out of the land of Egypt." Like, what is this reminding us of? Aaron. These people are sinners. 1 Kings 16 just tells a bunch about the north kings. And they all walk in the ways of Jeroboam, the first king. They're all evil and bad and wicked kings. Until we get to the end, we have this guy named Ahab, and he makes Baal the official god of the northern kingdom. We get to let's look at 2 Kings chapter 8. 2 Kings is more about the southern kingdom, the northern kingdom. It's really hard to tell when we're going back and forth between the kings. But when we get to 2 Kings chapter 8, 16 through 17, let's look at verse 18. It's talking about this king. It says he walked in the way. It's southern kingdom king. It says he walked in the ways of the kings of Israel in the house of Ahab. Like the southern kingdom is just as bad as the northern kingdom. They are evil and wicked and bad kings. Verse 19, but the Lord was unwilling to destroy Judah because of his servant David, since he promised to give him a lamp of David and his sons forever. God will not destroy Judah because he will establish a king from David forever. The northern kingdom goes into exile. Assyria comes down and destroys them. Assyrian army. I spent a long time on this part of the PowerPoint, so I want everyone to enjoy this part, please. Okay. Assyrian army is growing. It's becoming huge. They're a threat. They take over the northern kingdom, okay? This guy is Sennacherib. He's the leader. They take over the northern kingdom, and then they come down to Judah, the southern kingdom. They surround Jerusalem. And we find it in 2 Kings 18 through 20. There's this king named Hezekiah. It's like, is Hezekiah good or bad? It's like, he's not looking too good. And then the people say, Sennacherib says, I want you to surrender Jerusalem. This is the highest conflict in kings because the place where the son of David will come and rule is being threatened. What is going to happen? It all goes on to King Hezekiah, and King Hezekiah prays one of the most beautiful prayers in the entire Bible. And in one night, verse 35 of 2 Kings 18. 2 Kings 19. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And he wipes them all out. Sennacherib goes back home. Hezekiah makes a foolish mistake. King from Babylon comes down. Hezekiah's like, oh, cool, the king from Babylon's here. Maybe I can become popular if I show him, like, all my gold. The king of Babylon is like, or Nebuchadnezzar comes down later. He's like, oh, you have a lot of gold? Well, I'll take that with me. And then he's like, okay, also, I'm going to take all of your people with me, too. Why is this a huge problem that people are leaving here and going here? The king comes from Jerusalem, from Judah, yeah. And what did God promise to Abraham? Land. In Deuteronomy chapter 4, God said, if you obey me, you will live in the land. If you disobey me, the land will vomit you out. And this is what's happening. And it looks like this thing from David, this Davidic covenant we're really looking forward to, is just part of this restoration. We get to the end of 2 Kings. Can someone read 2 Kings 25, 27 through 30? Then we'll be done.
And in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, Evil-Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he began to reign, graciously freed Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke kindly to him, and gave him a seat above the seats of the kings who were with him in Babylon. So Jehoiachin put off his prison garments, and every day of his life he dined regularly at the king's table. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king according to his daily needs as long as he lived.
This story ends with Jehoiachin. Why in the world would this book end with this random guy named Jehoiachin? Like, why is he significant at all? Where's he from?
The lineage goes through him to Christ.
Yeah. He's a king from the tribe of Judah. And even though everyone is exiled, everyone has been taken to Babylon, there's a king from the line of David who is alive. And the hope of all the world rests in him. And maybe from this king will come a king who will bring the obedience of the people. A king who will possess the gates of his enemies. A king who will restore these relationships. A king who will crush the head of the serpent and free the people of God. David was a good king, but we need someone better than David because David's too much like us. Solomon was a good king, but he failed. And all these other kings failed. We're looking forward to someone even greater. And we finish Kings with the king of Judah alive in exile. And we need to know what's going to happen. So, come back next week. Yeah, did you have a question?
Well, I found in 1 Kings 12:21, it's Judah and Benjamin.
Okay.
As the two tribes.
Thank you.